So a couple months ago, well, I think almost 6 months ago at this point, I told myself I was going to start reviewing books on YouTube. I did a couple of those, and then I've kind of been absent. So, first of all, before I get into the book I want to review today, I should just kind of explain that I am coming back to this. Hopefully, going to commit more to it this time. I've got a couple things that I'm reading right now that I'm planning to do reviews on when I finish them. Um, I just kind of was settling into my first like real job post college, and took me a while to get into a routine with that. But I think I'm starting to get more stable now, in terms of how I spend my time and finding time to do stuff like this. So I am going to be back to making the book reviews here on YouTube, and I need to talk about Foundation and Empire and Second Foundation, which are the second and third books of the original Foundation trilogy. There's also a couple prequels and a couple sequels that I might read, but I have not done yet, so this is going to be just about the conclusion of the original trilogy. I read the second book, Foundation and Empire, shortly after I read the first book and reviewed it here on my channel. But I told myself I wouldn't post a review for that one until I read the third book as well, because I wanted to combine them, which I am doing now. But I didn't get around to reading that third book, which is called Second Foundation, until about a month ago. And and then just this past month I've been very busy. I got to finally visit a couple of my friends who moved to New Orleans after college. Did that last week. But yeah, so I I really liked both of these books. I don't have them in front of me to hold up and show, like I've been doing, because my grandfather is borrowing them right now. He is also reading the trilogy. But yeah, I think there's not a whole lot that's drastically different from the first book. And for that reason, I don't have a ton to talk about, at least with the second book, Foundation and Empire. So, I mean, where the first book leaves off, you see the foundation starting to grow, and the first galactic empire still exists, but it's pretty far away, and they're not too worried about it yet. The second book, Foundation and Empire, as the title suggests, sort of covers what happens as the Foundation begins to expand and comes into contact with the remnants of the Empire. And yeah, again, it's not drastically different from the first book. Works pretty much the same way. The individual characters don't receive a ton of characterization. We're sort of more focused on society as a character, and like human psychology as a character. And the Foundation ends up winning their conflict with the remnants of the Empire, not because of any individual's actions, but rather just because human psychology in the course of history, guides the leaders of the remnants of the Empire to behave in a way that ends up kind of undermining the position of this general who is attacking the Foundation. And it's done in a very fun way. It's a good read. And yeah, I mean, it's pretty much the same type of stuff as the first book, just getting to an even grander scale now. So if you like the first book, I do recommend continuing on. If you didn't like the first book, I think you can call it quits. There's not much that's going to change. I really liked the first book, and I did like the second book. That kind of covers the first half of the second book. The second half of the second book, so we're talking about the second half of Foundation and Empire. See, honestly, here's the thing. I think instead of a trilogy, this really should be just two bigger books, because the first half of Foundation and Empire is almost feels like an epilogue to Foundation, whereas the second half of Foundation and Empire is more like a prologue to the third book, which is called Second Foundation. third book is called Second Foundation. A little confusing, but I mean it makes sense though if you actually read it, because the third book gets into this idea that Hari Seldon actually set up two foundations. One of them, which is the one we've been following so far, was supposed to just kind of try to survive so that there's some sort of infrastructure in place to take over when the empire finally falls. And they're not supposed to get super into psychohistory or psychology, the stuff that Hari Seldon was actually writing about. The second foundation was all psychohistorians, and they were supposed to continue studying psychohistory, update the plan as needed, and subtly guide the first foundation as needed. But the first foundation is not really supposed to know what the second foundation is doing, because there's this idea that if you know that you are being measured by psychohistorians, your actions become harder for them to predict. You know, like if people have no idea that they're being watched, you can predict what they're going to do. If they know that they're being watched, then the person watching them can no longer predict them. Which I think that's like a real thing in real life. Psychologists will talk about that. That is a real thing. And obviously it has big implications for the plot of this story. So, but yeah, that's what the third book is mostly about, is that second foundation, hence the title. And the second half of Foundation and Empire is sort of a prologue to that, but focusing on this guy called the Mule. He is a mutant who has some sort of, the mutation that he has gives him like psychic powers that, first of all, make it possible for him to manipulate people's emotions, and not exactly mind control. Like he doesn't, it's not that he is psychically forcing somebody to behave in a certain way. It's that he is changing their personality so that they want to behave in the way that he would want them to behave. So that's a power that he has, and then because he has that power, it is difficult for the psychohistorians to predict his actions and the actions of people around him and influenced by him. So this second half of Foundation and Empire is not even really about the Empire anymore. Well, not about the First Galactic Empire, but rather about the Mule building his own empire, really right on the doorstep of the Foundation. And then he learns about the second foundation and learns that they are like the one group of people that could maybe defeat him. So then there's a race between him and some of our main characters to see who can find the second foundation first. And then book 3 is focused more on that at first. For the first half of book 3 is the struggle between the second foundation and the Mule. And then the second half of book 3, the conclusion of the original trilogy, is about people from the first foundation saying, hey, wait a minute, there's a second foundation and they're supposed to like subtly influence us without us knowing. We don't like that. We want to find them and destroy them. And that's the conflict there. So this is where it actually gets a little bit different from what's going on in the first book, and I really liked this aspect of it because in the first book, you know, it's fun to watch the Foundation and how the plan from Hari Seldon and psychohistory is guiding them, and seems like almost invincible. Like no matter what they do, Hari Seldon predicted what they were going to do, like hundreds, even thousands of years into the future, and he set into motion a course of events that would guide them to victory, and they would eventually become the Empire. But after a little while of that, you know, like towards the end of book 2, that starts to get a little bit boring because it's like there's almost no tension. You know, it's fun to watch the course of history through that, but if you know that they're gonna win no matter what, you know, what's the point? So I feel like Asimov realized that that would be the case, and that's why he brings in the mule. I think that was a really interesting way to sort of throw a wrench into the plan. And I don't want to like spoil the way that it's resolved, but it's pretty satisfying. I'm sorry that this review isn't like super detailed. Again, it's been a month since I read book 3, and it's been a couple months since I read book 2, but I wanted to get closure for this trilogy. If you liked the first book, I do recommend finishing the trilogy. Definitely worth it. At some point in the next year or two, I do plan to check out the sequels, which are called, they're over on my shelf, Foundation's Edge and Foundation and Earth. I have heard that those ones are actually a little bit more character driven, and don't cover quite as wide a range of time. And they also kind of start to talk about how, like, okay, he had this plan to make a second empire, but is that actually a good thing? Is that actually a noble goal? Which is a question that I had in my mind when I was reading this trilogy. It's certainly a question that Frank Herbert had in his mind when he read this trilogy, and it's a question that I think Asimov does address a little bit in the sequels from what I've heard. So I am going to read those. I'm not sure if I'm going to read the prequels because I've heard they're not quite as good. And I think the point of them was more to tie the Foundation books into Asimov's other settings, which I have not read very much. So if I do end up reading his robots books or his Galactic Empire books, then maybe I'll read the Foundation prequels just to see how that all ties together. But otherwise, I have not heard great things about them compared to the original trilogy or the sequels. But yeah, so I mean that's my slightly scatterbrained review of the second and third book in the Foundation series. As for what's coming up on my YouTube channel, like I said, I'm reading a couple things that I do plan on reviewing. Most recently, while I was in New Orleans, I picked this up, The Possessed by Elif Batuman. I'm loving it, and I'm really looking forward to talking about it when I finish it. I also studied Russian in college and read a lot of Russian literature like this author did, and that's what this book is about, so that'll be a lot of fun. And on that subject, I'm also looking forward to talking about some Russian literature on this channel, especially some of the slightly more obscure authors. Like, I love Dostoevsky, but I don't know if there's much for me to say about him that hasn't already been said, unless I, like, spent years and years and years studying all the subtext in every one of his books. So I'm gonna try to talk about some of the less discussed Russian authors, especially from the like early 20th century, like especially in between the world wars, like early Soviet, and also like pre World War One, pre Soviet, like the first 10 or 20 years of the 20th century, because that's a really interesting and kind of under discussed period of Russian literature, and it's a period that one of my Russian literature professors in college really focused on. So he gave me a lot of recommendations that I've been reading on top of what we read in his class. And I want to talk a lot about that because there's some really interesting, like weird occult stuff going on in Russian literature at that time, from like 1900 through, like I said, through the interwar period in the 30s. So yeah, that's what's coming up, as well as some more fantasy and sci-fi here and there. Yeah.